Welcome in live to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We are continuing with our our conference championship previews as we roll into Friday and Saturday slates. Knocked out the Big Ten and ACC ones earlier this week, gave you guys our thoughts and opinions on the game, along with some betting tips that we might have. We are moving on to probably the most exciting game of the Saturday, and that's the SEC championship game. Pretty much everybody's been waiting for this inevitable matchup between the Georgia Bulldogs and Alabama Crimson Tide. It's no secret that Alabama's kind of gotten the best of Georgia the last couple of years, but this Georgia team's different. We've talked about it. We talked about it in the summer. We've been talking about it all year. This Georgia team is legit, and it's going to pose a lot of problems for this Alabama team that just does not seem as physical or really as talented as we've seen in the past. So, Dill, I'm going to kick it off to you to start. What do you see in this game between the two teams matchup-wise, and how do you think this game goes?
So I mean, if we're just talking pure matchup, I think the real issue with Alabama is they can't really play any sort of consistent defense against the better teams. Like, yeah, they didn't give up a ton of points to Auburn, but there was no Bo Nix, and in the middle of the game, Finley looked very hurt, and so like they didn't give up a ton of points. They didn't give up a ton of points to LSU, but also I wouldn't say shut them down. I just think Georgia's like a way better offense than what they've been in the past 5 years. Like Georgia's always played defense to some extent, not to the extent they're playing now, but never played any offense that could like win shootouts with Bama or any of the big dogs for that matter. And I think you're in a different spot where Stetson Bennett's playing extremely good football.
Oh, yeah.
Their running game is extremely good with three very skilled guys. I think Milton might be hurt, right? But
yeah, he's banged up.
But that still leaves you with Robinson and Zamir White, or not Robinson, but Dalvin Cook's brother.
Yeah.
So you just have like stars. That Brock Bowers at tight end is one of the most incredible players I've seen as a freshman. I don't get how he runs as fast as he does at that size, but he moves. And then it just seems like they're really starting to click. And I just think it seems like a matchup not well suited for Bama at this point.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, and this is the story of the game in my mind, is we saw Alabama really struggle physically up front with the Auburn front seven. Pretty much minus Evan Neal, who takes care of business pretty much every week and is our number one left tackle kind of going into the draft. Everywhere else, though, they were kind of getting beat. They really struggled to run the ball. On an Auburn defense, that's good. But, I mean, if you're struggling to run the ball and block
They're not Georgia
of Auburn, you're going to have some serious trouble blocking this Georgia team that obviously brings in Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, along with some studs on the edge as well. So that's kind of the biggest mismatch I see in the game. Let's get to how Alabama has been looking form-wise rolling into this game. They started out with a
terrible. You can't argue anything else. Like play a very, very close game to Georgia.
Yeah.
Or not Georgia, but Arkansas. Obviously played two horror games against LSU and Auburn. Like they shouldn't be scoring in overtime with Auburn against with a backup quarterback, even in a rivalry game. So there's just something different. It's not the same Bama, and I think you're right. It's just they're not physically better than most teams at this point on either side of the defensive line or offensive line.
We have seen their defense kind of come into form after a rough start, giving up 30 to Florida, letting Tennessee throw the ball a little bit, and obviously that big blunder, giving up 41 to Texas A&M and Zach Calzado let off.
Yeah, but they gave up a lot to Arkansas too. It's like they're not.
That is true.
I get that they looked okay against LSU and Auburn, but God, those two might be two of the bottom tier offenses
especially
in the game. And if you can't, I mean, Arkansas is not a high flying offense, and they look really pretty pedestrian against them. So I think with the exception of Will Anderson, who's incredibly good, like they're not like what they have been, where they have four down linemen who are all going pro. and who can rush the passer and stop the run. Like they're just not that at this point. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if their D coordinator gets fired, because there seems like now 2 straight years where the defense is way underperforming the talent. So
talent on the field. I agree. As far as Alabama's offense looks, it's been rolling, and then it kind of just really struggled against an Auburn team. Obviously, losing Jamison Williams, who's emerged as their number one receiver, to a target and call in the first half, so he'll be fine for the SEC championship game this Saturday. John Mechie kind of had to step in, but we could kind of tell that he's not that one. He did end up with 13 catches, 150 yards, but that offense was really struggling to move the ball.
Didn't you think the problem was once Brian Robinson was out, they really struggled to run? And
yeah,
I'm not sure Trey Sanders has it. I know we were talking, like, he just seems to run high. He doesn't run behind his pads and doesn't like get hard yards, which
they had a couple of
Brian Robinson does. Yeah,
didn't pick up, and I think it was a lot due to Trey Sanders just not being able to get that gritty 1 yard after contact. And you said it right. He doesn't really run behind his pads, and we saw that. He's a former 5-star guy. I was kind of excited to see him play, and he just was very underwhelming. Bryce Young was under pressure pretty much all game.
That was the other problem.
He definitely got a little rattled in the pocket. He never gets rattled demeanor-wise, but rattled in the pocket for sure. Kind of running for his life most of the game, and I think largely due to a relatively, not even relative, it's a weak offensive line. It's not a physically dominant offensive line like it was last year with Landon Dickerson, Alex Leatherwood, and Deontay Brown. So,
yep. Yeah, no, that is a huge issue. Just being able to be consistent. It was a problem against LSU as well. I mean, they scored some points on Arkansas, but I wouldn't say their offensive line was the shining star of the game. They hit a couple of big plays to JMO.
And Arkansas's defenses, I think they're very, very overrated offense or defense.
Yeah, and Arkansas is not a pressure defense, which kind of masks Alabama's problems. And Georgia is certainly the other end of the spectrum that plays very aggressive and can get after you with 4. So
okay,
that seems going to be a problem.
A little talking about the offensive Bama versus the Georgia defense. We'll talk a little bit about the injuries to that side of the ball. Obviously, I think Christopher Smith is looking like he's going to go, so that'll be some good depth in the secondary. What I will say one thing that I worry about before moving on to Georgia's offense versus Alabama's defense is Darian Kendrick has struggled with speedier receivers. Chris Olave got the best of him against Ohio State. He's been better against more of the contested guys, but when it comes
that's not Bama's
to
game.
The speedsters, and let me tell you, Jamison Williams is probably the best speedster receiver in the country right now. Absolutely blazes, gets behind the defense. So that's one thing George is really going to have to handle. And I think being able to get pressure and not let those routes develop downfield is going to be a real key to that.
And they're not going to get run on. I'd be really surprised.
2 high safeties pretty much the whole game. I agree.
So, yeah.
So let's move on to, in my mind, the more interesting matchup, which is an Alabama defense that we've talked about has underperformed a little bit, but they do have some studs at backer and Henry To'oTo'o, Christian Harris, and then obviously at the edge position, Will Anderson's been phenomenal. This Alabama defense looked very good against a pedestrian Auburn offense, but Will Anderson's kind of the key guy. Jamari Slayer is probable for the game. I think we're going to get an 80% him. He's been banged up, but I can't imagine he doesn't play this game. And I think we'll see a lot of Darnell Washington lining up on Will Anderson and giving him some chips. I mean, you basically got a tackle playing tight end and Darnell Washington. Hopefully slow Will Anderson down, kind of take him out of the game because he is the game changer on that side of the ball for the Crimson Tide. And so if you can take him out of the game at least a little bit, that's definitely what George is going to.
Yeah, and just to go in on that, the one thing Alabama has been able to do a little bit is stop the run. Like they haven't been. I mean, the reason they were giving up points to Arkansas was KJ Jefferson for throwing for about 326 yards, and it seems like when against Florida, well, they did give up some running to the Florida guys, but that was a lot of quarterback action. So we'll see. I think as of late, it seems like Bama's been a little more stout against the run. They do have a decent front seven led by the linebackers. And if they can stop the run, that's where I think it could get interesting. If they because then you can turn Will Anderson loose, and I don't think Stetson Bennett. I think he's playing really well, but I'm guessing you don't want him throwing the ball 30 plus times. Probably,
which I think you might need to do. And this is the game where it's like, are they going to regret going with Stetson Bennett? Because he might not be that guy who can win football games with him throwing the ball. I personally do, and I don't think they'll need to rely on him. They obviously have two phenomenal backs with Zamir White and James Cook. You can get James Cook on the edge, see if he can beat those backers in space, who are very good football players in space. So that'll be tough. One other thing I want to note, Karis Jackson, he's probable for the game from what I've heard Kirby Smart say in his press this week. He's going to be a big name to get. He's kind of one of the more explosive players on the outside. And then you obviously have Darnell Washington, Brock Bowers kind of on the inside, and no Arian Smith. So Jermaine Burton's going to have to step up with some of those explosives downfield. But at the end of the day, I think Georgia's just too good on defense. And I think Alabama's really going to struggle to block them up front. And so I'm leaning towards Georgia. So I guess, do you have any comments on the game before we get into kind of the picks?
Yeah, I mean, I see Georgia. I think they've been playing dominant football all year. Bama is not playing great right now, and yeah, I just think the physicality. I think when Bama used to be able to at least match them physically and then have way better skill. That's kind of what was the recipe, right? Georgia's always been able to play physical with people, but hasn't had a quarterback who can march the ball or an offense in general. I don't necessarily want to blame it all on the quarterbacks because it's been just maybe a lack of skill and whatnot from their offense as a whole, but it seems like they have it this year. I think Brock Bowers emerging is huge for them. Cook is really good pass guy, and Stetson Bennett's playing really consistent and just solid ball. So, I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts. It does seem like, Georgia really has no business losing this game in my mind, but
yeah. So
I don't know. They still got to guard big plays.
Yeah, let's get into the picks. Line's currently sitting Georgia's 6.5-point favorite. Over under is 49.5. My picks, I'm leaning towards kind of just not really taking the over under because I can see this game. Either Georgia can kind of move the ball on Alabama and this game can go over. Jameson Williams gets behind the defense. But I'm more sticking with Georgia 6.5. I think they match up very, very well. Again, we talked about the defensive line of Georgia really, really taking it to the offensive line. And I think Georgia's going to be able to do enough on offense to get the job done and cover that 6.5. It's a very good team. It's a very banged up team, but it's a very deep team. I mean, everywhere you look, there's like high 5-star players starting. A good offensive line. We'll see if they're able to run on a Alabama defense that's starting to kind of play the run a little bit better. At least they did against Auburn. But yeah, I'm leaning Georgia 6.5. Really not touching the over under. What about you?
I would I think the 6.5 is my play, but I think if you don't love that, I actually do think the over is pretty good. I think we generally think those two defenses come in and play well, and they've always been good defenses, but these games always seem to wind up being somewhat high scoring. So, 49.5, that's a low over. That's like 25 a pop. I don't hate it personally. I think both have the playmakers to do it. George, because what Stetson can do, he does throw a nice, like, intermediate, like 30 to 40 yard ball, and they have been hitting a lot of big plays on everybody, and Bama will give up some plays. And I think Bama can make some plays. So I'm kind of with you. I think what I'd prefer to do is just take the Georgia 6.5. But I think if you don't love that,
take the over.
I don't think it's a bad over. When I looked at it, I was like, ooh, that's pretty low for the amount of talent on both sides of the offenses, along with the fact that you have an Alabama team that has Jameson Williams returning punts. And I mean, if he takes one to the house or vice versa, Georgia gets one. Yeah, that's like very much in play for over ball. That's over ball, but
I would
Georgia's going to score. That's the only the reason I think there's a chance it doesn't hit is if Bama just gets dragged. So
I don't think they're going to get dragged. Though. I really don't.
I don't know, but I think there's a way that they're just overwhelmed. I mean, they got a little overwhelmed by Auburn, which is the problem.
Yeah,
like Auburn's defense was overwhelming them straight up. Whether
they can't run the ball and you have no Brian Robinson, that's gonna be a problem because Trey Sanders just is not that dude. And quite frankly, no one behind Trey Sanders. Like there's just no running back depth there,
which is crazy for a Bama team.
Which is nuts.
It is. It is kind of what it is.
And the workhorse. You look at the box scores of all these Alabama games, and it's him getting 25 plus carries and Trey Sanders getting 1 or 2. But nothing really much until he was forced into action last weekend. This game is going to be so fun. It's offensive or NFL draft talent pretty much everywhere on the field. Both the red shirt. I love that.
Got it.
You have to.
Michigan going to the big time. Come on.
Yeah, come on.
Wait till it falls off.
But yeah, it's got like Will Anderson going up against some solid tackles in Georgia. Evan Neal going up against some of the elite pass rushers Georgia has.
It is going to be such an incredible game. I'm so excited.
I think 3 of the top 5 linebackers in the country. If you're high on Christian Harris and Henry To'oTo'o.
To'oTo'o, top 5, please.
Yeah, that might be a boost. I loved him going into the year, but
the other 2.
Yeah. And then you have some really good matchups in the secondary. See if Darian Kendrick can and Keely Ringo, who's not draft eligible yet, but will be like a high draft pick when he comes out, going up against some solid receiving weapons in John Mechie and Jameson Williams. So it's going to be a great game. It's going to be a fun game. I think everyone's been waiting. Yeah,
this is the game of the year. All year, everybody wants. I mean, aside from Ohio State, Michigan as a bias, but like. Mm-hmm. If you looked at the beginning of the year, I think everybody was like, I can't wait for Georgia Bama and the SEC title. You knew they were both getting there. And it's like, here we are. It's going to be sick.
And so, that's kind of our takes. We'll be live tweeting this game. I am very, very excited. It's going to be a fun Saturday of college football. I'm giddy thinking about it. But that's our picks. Georgia minus 6.5. We already have it locked up. I would get on it in case that hook gets to 7, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Appreciate you hanging in there. We'll be banging out some of the rest of the conference championship previews, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.